Hi guys, welcome to Workshop 2. It's the last day of my Easter holidays. I thought I'd bring you a video of what I've been up to over the last 2 weeks. Been delays in delivery of building materials, which has meant I've not probably quite done as much as I wanted to do on the terrace. I think everything else we've hit our goals for the holiday. So I just thought I'd make this video a little bit different from my normal videos, which is in the workshop. There's 6 or 8 projects that I've done over the 2-week period. Some are finished, some are not, some will be continued later in the year. It's always nice to watch a bit of TV whilst you're on holiday. Due to winter or early spring storms, I needed to redirect my 80cm dish just to pick up the Astra satellite. The big intended project for this holiday was to put up the block walls around the sun terrace. Last year I removed the decking from the back of the house, and now I needed to remove the framework from the old pergola. I threw this beam up about 12 years ago. I can't believe how heavy it was, and once I got rid of all the timber work, I could then continue digging out the foundations. This was the first Sunday of my holiday. The next day I went to the builder's merchant and was really disappointed to find they could not deliver any of the building materials for another 10 days. So on the first Thursday of my holidays, when I go to my local village for my French lesson, I called at another builder's merchant and bought a car boot full of 15cm blocks. It was only a drop in the ocean, but I was excited and I wanted to do some of my walling. That excited, in fact, that I forgot to film most of this process, but don't worry, if you enjoy this, there's plenty to come later. Okay, so with the disappointment of the building materials out of the way, I decided I could now look to see what other jobs I could do. First things was to go through the barn and find out what timber I had lurking inside there. And one simple job was to fit some additional shelving in the utility room of the house. And for the shelving I cut down some parquet floor that I bought cheaply as seconds. Most of my work shirts eventually get relegated to DIY shirts, and this shirt is quite possibly the worst work shirt ever. What was I thinking when I bought it? I made these cupboards a few years ago. They're actually constructed from a door pre-hung in a casing with 2 side cheeks fitted. I find it a really quick way to make cupboards. Now, do you recognise these doors? These were made in the Small Loft Workshop a few months ago. Small Loft Workshop was created solely to supply the builds here. Because it was early spring, the garden looked really fresh and crisp. Now I can't take any credit for this, my wife is the gardener, and the garden is her pride and joy. And as such, some of my woodworking projects decorate the garden. Now whilst we was on holiday, it was my wife's birthday, and I promised her I would install the timber greenhouse we'd been keeping for a while. And due to the lack of building materials, that project was really in jeopardy. But because I'm a man of my word, I decided I'd turn her cold frame into a mini greenhouse, using the best parts of the deck I'd removed the previous year. Now this was a secret squirrel operation, and I tried to do it without her noticing. Once the base was made, I could then just screw the cold frame to the top, which extends the height and therefore the growing season within it. The remainder of the non-rotten decking board went to make the formwork for the base of the greenhouse for when the concrete did arrive. Now I'm not going to dwell too much on this greenhouse build because I've made a video elsewhere on my channel, and I'll put a link to it in the description below. Gracie loves a good project. She's always there waiting for some creature to run out. As well as putting up the greenhouse for my wife, it means it's no longer stored in the barn. This barn will eventually become my workshop. At the moment I can only use one half of it, as the floor is yet to be concreted on the right hand side, and some of the concrete that to be delivered is for this job. Because I had some time on my hand, It was nice to spend some time in here and envisage how it may look when it does eventually become my workshop. This box was made years ago when I ran a CNC router in a shop fitting company and became the base of my old saw before I bought the Evolution saw. So it now contributes to my underbench storage. And as well as tidying up my bench, I made a really quick and cheap clamp rack. And now I've tidied the floor, I can use my Evolution saw inside. My bench hasn't been this tidy for years. One of my wife's pride and joy is this little John Deere tractor that we bought a few years ago. It makes cutting the grass really easy and fun. There was a time when we had to trim all this grass, which wasn't much fun in the French summer heat. So I've had this project on the go for about 3 years. We call it the square way because we're turning an archway into a square way. And the remainder of the panel doors I made in the small loft workshop earlier this year are to be fitted within this square way. As well as fitting the doors, I had managed to find enough timber to make the unit on the right hand side. And now I had an almost tidy workshop, I could utilise it for this project. So using one of my favourite material, tongue and groove softwood floorboarding, I ripped the floorboarding down to create the carcass. And once I had my components, used my block blade to put a V on the tongue and groove edges. Glued them into panels. Whilst the glue was drying, I cut some bearers and also made some really narrow shelves to fit inside the cupboards. If you make really narrow shelves, I always find it better to put a small upstand on the front to stop things falling off, and for this I tack them on with my Titan nailer. And once the glue had dried on my carcass panels, I sanded the panels up and then screwed them together. It was fantastic, I could use my bench at long last. And once the carcass was made, it was just a case of fitting it into the gap within the square way framing. And using a DVD as a spacer, fitted the shelves for what will eventually be some DVD racks. Notice you can take a boy out of Yorkshire, but you can't take the Yorkshire out of the boy, and it is a really good Yorkshire movie. Although this one is dubbed in French, and not so bad doesn't translate very well. And the final part of this project, for now anyway, is to fit the shelves. Interestingly, when I returned back to the UK for work, the decorating fairies came and painted all these. Eventually, we get to day 10 of my holidays, and my delivery came. I don't think I've ever bought a full lorry of anything before. On this occasion, I did quite a good job. I have enough aggregate for 5 cubic metres of concrete, some sand and timber for the roof of the sun terrace. Now the delivery came much earlier in the day than we anticipated, and it gave us a real outside chance of getting the greenhouse up before I went back to the UK. Within the hour we had started mixing. Two days later, the last day of my holiday, when the concrete had cured enough to release the mould, we put the frames up. I don't think I can describe how excited Lynn was at this point. And now Lynn has 2 greenhouses. On the day between mixing the concrete for the greenhouse and the day we put the frames up, I also fill the foundations for the sun terrace with concrete. There is quite a lot of reinforcement bar in this mix as well. And this is as far as I got during my Easter holidays. The terrace has moved on somewhat since, but that will be covered in an additional movie. I hope you enjoyed this different movie. If so, please give me a thumbs up and maybe subscribe. Until then, au revoir.